Uh, I mean, I think as long as I've been alive, it would be very unusual to find somebody who has a gun. They would have to be like some sort of a farmer or something, I imagine. And even then, I don't even know what process they can go through to get any sort of firearm. I think it's slightly better over in Northern Ireland, but at least over here, like I could probably dedicate like a decade of my life working every day, like full time, trying to get a gun license, and I don't think I would get one.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Okay, welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 206. I'm talking to Liquid Zulu. He's an interesting fellow in Scotland. He's got a YouTube channel, which certainly has some good stuff. He's a libertarian, and we're going to talk about what's going on with the United Kingdom right now. We might get onto some other issues as well. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Yeah, I had some nice lunch. I almost was really late for this. Only a little bit late.
Oh yeah, well, stuff happens sometimes. I got to ask you first of all, what's going on with the UK? I mean, it seems like it's becoming the perfect example of what we would call anarcho-tyranny. Let criminals do whatever they want. Prosecute people for defending themselves. Prosecute people for expressing opinions online. Meanwhile, let little gangs rape teenage girls and stuff like that. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, is that pretty much the truth?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see like online how like even like the media's in on it. Like there'll be like one article they'll be describing it as like, oh, a 17-year-old child is being persecuted for something, and it's like some guy who's gone and like murdered multiple children, and it's like a 15-year-old adult arrested for violent conduct at arrested for violent conduct at like protest or something, and like it's very very pervasive. I think what the root of this type of thing is that I think the British justice system is worried about being a little too harsh on Muslim immigrants because they don't want to be seen as racist or anything, unless it's in connection with terrorism. That's the one area I think where they actually do move fast on these type of things.
And of course, another thing that I will point out that I think is probably the one thing that has saved America is that Britain disarmed law-abiding citizens many years ago. What is the status of gun rights over there right now, and how long has it been this way?
I mean, I think as long as I've been alive, it would be very unusual to find somebody who has a gun. They would have to be like some sort of a farmer or something, I imagine. And even then, I don't even know what process they can go through to get any sort of firearm. I think it's slightly better over in Northern Ireland, but at least over here, like I could probably dedicate like a decade of my life working every day, like full time, trying to get a gun license, and I don't think I would get one. And
does that even do people even go hunting there anymore? I mean, it's
there is some of that, but it's often like more politically connected people, like it's like aristocracy type level. They'll go like fox hunting or whatever.
Yeah, from what I hear, fox hunting is actually kind of a preppy activity too.
Oh yeah,
it's they treat it like it's something formal, whereas hunting in America is still very much the country people do it. Although we have I don't know how different wildlife is there in the UK either, but you hear the deer, they get into your cornfields in the summertime, so so the farmer can get even with them in November by going hunting. So that's the whole deal.
There definitely are like a lot of deer around in Scotland because I mean throughout the whole UK, like ages ago. I mean, I think we used to have bears and wolves in the UK, but then they were like basically eradicated because, of course, it's like a closed island, right? But then a while back, I remember seeing that the Scottish government was considering reintroducing wolves back into the wilderness to deal with the deer, which is like, I would much prefer a deer running around than a fucking wolf.
That would be very interesting, and also, just what happens too when you've removed a species and you reintroduce that species. It can be very interesting to see how that happens. They like to play these little games, though. It's with nature, so that's really interesting to see that it's gotten to that point. I don't know. So I mean, there's no, and just sounds like to me there's no market. There's so what do people do now to defend themselves?
Well, as far as I know, if you're carrying something for the purpose of defending yourself with it, then that's no bueno. Like even if it's just like a big stick or something, if you were carrying that big stick with the purpose of like, oh, I could defend myself with this stick, maybe it's like a walking stick or whatever, then the prosecutor could go, oh, he was trying to go out and hurt people with this, and then they'll probably cause you some legal problems there. Even like, I think the beefiest defense weapon you could reasonably carry around without any sort of like special permission from the government or whatever would probably be a knife. A knife is like, it has to be less than 3 inches the blade. It can't lock, and you have to only be able to open it with two hands. You can't be able to open it with one hand. So that's very restricted. And if you were to actually use it for self-defense rather than just like a utility knife, then they'd probably get you for like maybe even murder or something, right? They're very, very strict with that type of thing. You just got to basically like cower and block blows and wait for the police to deal with it.
Wow, yeah. And I don't know. Well, you all still play cricket there. I don't know if a cricket bat or something like that, or a baseball bat can certainly be used as a weapon in America, but or even golf clubs, but it's definitely not something you want to try to have to do.
If you were to carry around like a cricket bat or a baseball bat or whatever, and the police see you carrying that around, they're going to be like, "Oh, are you going to practice, mate?" And if you're not going to practice, if you're just carrying it around, they'll probably confiscate it.
Yeah, one difference I've noticed, it almost never happens that a burglar is in a home where the residents are there. Burglaries in America happen if somebody goes out goes on vacation, or if they go out for a weekend. I think they probably scout these houses and they know that the people who live there are completely gone. But they almost, and I've heard it's actually quite common for them to happen when people are at home in the UK, or at least it's much more common.
Yeah, that very well may be the case. I don't know much about UK burglaries specifically, but I mean, it does make sense if you're not worried about, because obviously if you're breaking into a house in America, you're worried that they'll be on the other side with like a 12 gauge and you're just going to die, right? Yes. But over here, there's no castle doctrine or anything over here. They can probably just take your stuff and get out before the police come.
They're trying to get rid of castle doctrines and stuff like that here. Unfortunately, in America, it does depend on the state where you live. I don't know. Is it pretty much universal in the UK now, or are there good and bad parts in the UK? I mean,
well, it does vary depending on area. So the UK is made up of Wales, England, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and
yes.
You
have counties as well.
Yeah. The counties, that's generally like, how much council tax will you be paying? It's generally not like laws about like self-defense, but the Wales, I believe, Scotland and Northern Ireland have devolved parliaments, which have like, they can pass laws contradictory to the laws for the whole UK, and that'll kind of overwrite it. So I think Scotland's devolved parliament probably has the most powers because of the whole independence referendum thing. The idea was, well, instead of being independent, we'll just get more devolved powers for the Scottish Parliament. So the Scottish Parliament can do all kinds of things. Like, for instance, there's like university is free over here. Of course, there's no such thing as free university. Somebody's paying for it. But the idea is that if you are a student in Scotland, you can get the university admission is you don't have to pay for it. It's completely socialist, right? If you're a Scottish citizen, that is. And also they have a student loans program, but it's different to the American student loan. It's basically like the best loan you could possibly wish for. It's got 0% interest, and it just gets paid out of your check, right? So you might as well get it and then like pay it off 50 years later when it's like a tenth of the price to pay it off, you know. So that is not something you get, I don't believe, anywhere else in the UK. That's because Scotland has its own parliament, which is passing these things and passing it off the English wealth, of course.
Yeah, I get the impression that Scotland might be more socialist than England.
Oh yeah.
What about what's the attitude in, say, Wales and Northern Ireland? I mean, are there?
I don't know really anything about Welsh politics, but I do know that the general attitude, at least as far as I see it, from these various devolved countries, I suppose we could call them, like the satellite nations of the UK, is that, oh, England is causing all the problems, and we just gotta get more from England, you know. That is the general attitude as far as I see it. But Northern Ireland is a little bit of a different case because a lot of their politics center around obviously the North versus South, the whole Troubles controversy, right? Whether or not they're unionists or separatists. I don't know what the name for the separatists used is, but
well, yeah, I guess maybe Northern Ireland has more of the attitude because there was some resistance, maybe not from the Protestants there, but there's always been some resistance to the British. So maybe Northern Ireland's had more of an attitude of, we'll protect ourselves. I really don't know.
I think for a great many people, at least the Unionists in Northern Irish, I think they are more British aligned because they have like the no, we're Unionists, we're not with the Republic of Ireland, right?
Yeah,
and it's a big, like, this is something which I don't believe you see very much in America. It's a very big, like, Protestant versus Catholic split, because both of those religions kind of came up around in here, and there's a big, like, there's lots of tensions, even like in cities in like Scotland, like in Glasgow, like the two big football teams that everyone's like hating each other from. They have Celtics and Rangers, and one of them is Protestant, one of them is Catholic. So it's like, it's all Protestant versus Catholic hatred going around.
That's rather interesting. I didn't realize it spread outside of England. Has some of the stuff going on with immigrants maybe unified the Christians, or are they still fairly divided? Because, I don't ever, it's funny because I don't ever, I certainly remember hearing about things that the IRA would do in the 90s. But it seems like after September, after the attacks on the World Trade Center, I never heard anything about that. Maybe the media just wasn't covering it, or maybe they just thought there was the sense that they have a common enemy.
It's also like after the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the Troubles, I think most of the overt terrorism kind of died off.
The Good Friday Agreement, what's that?
Yeah. So the Good Friday Agreement was the sort of treaty, you might want to call it, which created the Republic of Ireland. And that's why Ireland is like a weird special case where if you are in Northern Ireland, like, it's open borders between Northern and Southern Ireland because people didn't want to like be split off from their neighbors. They didn't want to be forced into being unionist or separatist. And if you have Northern Irish heritage, then you can get an Irish passport, and vice versa. It's like quite weird separation. It's not like a total separation between the two.
Well, I think a lot. It's like, when the Belfast Blitz happened, and Ireland was officially neutral in the war. but the Irish Prime Minister said they are our people. He was very upset about that, even though it was an attack on Northern Ireland and technically an attack on a city in the United Kingdom. But he said they're our people. So yeah, there's always been that weird. I've been to Ireland. I managed to get to Ireland and England last year, and I'm glad I did. But I don't know if I'd go back. But certainly some things easy to love about England, but never made it up to Scotland though. But I heard it's beautiful. But beautiful, kind of like North Ireland in that same way. And also, there is somewhat of a Scottish separatist movement too. What's that? What do the Scottish separatists want?
So basically, the big grievance there, it's based on the same thing of, well, England is causing all the problems. We just got to get away from England, then all the problems are solved. That's the main line of the independence people. And their big issue on this front is, ironically, that they feel like Scotland was dragged out of the EU, so they want to leave the UK to rejoin the EU, which is like completely antithetical to what you'd think an independence movement would want. They wouldn't want to be ruled by any other parliament. They would just want the Scottish Parliament, but they just want to substitute Westminster for Brussels, which is like, it strikes me as nonsense. I mean, I support Scottish secession, but I don't want Scotland to then rejoin the EU afterwards. I support secession not on these like kind of socialist grounds of like just hating England. I support it on the grounds sort of more of a Hoppe type argument, where if you have smaller and smaller countries, it becomes much harder for them to have any sort of real socialism over people. Like the socialism, it's more contained, and you can just fuck off to like a couple miles away, and then you're in a new country or whatever.
Yeah, it's I've heard people say the same thing about Ireland. We fought 300 years to be independent of Britain, of London, and now we'll just surrender and hand ourselves over to Brussels. I don't get it. It sounds like like you said, you probably favored Brexit, but you also favor Scottish independence. But what has happened since Brexit? It seems like really they've not really done much of anything to make it happen. But
Yeah, so like after Brexit happened, the prime minister at the time, I believe it was David Cameron, he was anti-Brexit. So after the Brexit vote went through, he was like, all right, I'll resign. A new conservative took his place. There's been so many just swapping out between internal party votes that I can't even list them all. I can't even remember them all. But that has been like since Brexit until very recently, the Conservative Party has been in power, and they have done a terrible job at it. They haven't got anything done. I mean, we're technically not in the EU anymore, but they just cocked up the whole leaving thing. Like we could have got a way better deal out of that. And they just there has not been any big push for freedom or like any real big policy changes. It's just been kind of stagnation for like years now, which is why I'm a big reform supporter. Even though reform, I think they have some pretty big problems with their manifesto. Like they're like, oh yes, of course we got to keep taxing the rich, of course, stuff like that, which I hate. But they're far better, and reform does represent a possibility to bring some more freedom into the UK. So
yes.
I voted for them in the last general election.
And I didn't realize this exactly, but Scotland's about 5 million, whereas Britain is about, or England is about 55 million. So I mean, literally, this is a case, where England has overwhelmingly the majority to kind of do whatever they want, in spite of what people in Scotland or Wales want.
Yeah, And that's probably the reason why there are these. Well, there's also historical reasons why there's a Scottish Parliament, because they used to be two different
Yeah.
countries, of course. But like that's one of the main political pushes for devolving powers to the satellite nations, I call them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that legal term is principalities, but yes. And obviously, considering all this, I mean, Scotland can't really just, go it alone and build up walls. I mean, Scotland is still going to have to trade with people. They're going to have to, bring in manufactured goods, sell whatever they sell, and that, it's not like Scotland can just, stand alone all by themselves and not have relations with anybody. And obviously, if they do have relations, that they're most likely to have relations with England or relations with Ireland, because they're the closest countries. And then after that, I guess it might be the Netherlands or someplace like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like if you had like either Scotland or the UK being like some sort of free market society, you could very easily have like a Singapore of Europe type situation, is what people used to describe it as, where there's a lot of manufacturing goods being produced in Europe, and they're wanting to get out there so they can stop by in the UK, a nice free market to trade all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
That would be the ideal.
What are some of the leading industries or the leading exports of Scotland right now?
I think it's mostly oil, because
Okay.
there's obviously a lot of oil up in the North Sea. Depending on which city you're in, like most of the money is coming from the oil business.
Yes, and of course Scotland. We like to acknowledge that Scotland gave us golf. So yeah. But obviously you sell the oil and you bring in other things. It's you know. So what's going on? It seems like to me there's the the government of the UK is also becoming very much anti-free speech. What's going on with that now? I'm hearing some really unfortunate incidents happening.
Yeah, I mean the UK has never had any real free speech because, of course, we didn't ever have the First Amendment or anything like that. There was no constitution for us to have. There is, I believe, a constitution of the UK that was introduced by like Tony Blair not very long ago. It's like it's not anything like the American Constitution. So like it's the culture has been, because it's still a monarchy technically. It's like you get permission from the government to do certain things. It's not you are free for yourself, and then the government comes in and does various things. It's like a complete inversion of the US model, where instead of freedom and then the government encroaches on your freedom every so often, it's seen as, well, the government gave you permission to do these things, and they just didn't give you permission to speak in this sort of way. And like I'm sure everybody watching this knows all of the horrible violations that go on, where like there are certain things that I'm not allowed to say on this podcast, lest I be have a knock on my door the next morning and be arrested and have my life torn apart, right?
Yeah, it is quite unfortunate, and of course it'll be recorded, and of course I have went without video, but I haven't figured out how to disguise voices yet. But anyway, it's yeah. So there's never, but Britain has long had. Although I don't know if Scotland has been as much, we sometimes like to think of William Wallace and Braveheart. I don't know if Scotland, how much they share those traditions, but the traditions of English common law, the Magna Carta and things like that. It's a I mean, I think in some respects, and from what I hear, also the UK doesn't really even have a constitution at all, does it? Or
Yeah, not really. Certainly nothing like the US Constitution. Then again, even the U.S. Constitution, I don't think is sufficient to protect rights. Of course, I'm an
I,
anarchist after all, and like,
yeah, I made the statement. I said, I said, if you have a nation of intelligent humans, a Bill of Rights is not necessary. if you have a nation of stupid animals, a Bill of Rights is useless anyway.
Yeah.
It's
And you see this with, I believe I haven't verified this, but I saw that someone was saying that the Constitution of Liberia is essentially identical to the US Constitution. But of course, Liberia is not a very freedom-oriented place.
I think it very much. Actually, I think it very. I haven't looked at it, but I've heard it's very much modeled after the American Constitution because it was founded by freed slaves who went back to Africa. So, yeah, there's a lot of issues out there, the cultural issues, and this is part of what happens, too. Whether or not the British can have the cultural traditions to maintain a free society, and whether or not some of these other people don't. I mean, because one thing it's true, it seems like there's a case where you have people coming into Britain who really don't support the traditions of common law at all.
Oh yeah, definitely. Like it's mostly Sharia law supporters coming in these days. I and it's it is a shame, because I think common law is one of the better wrong legal systems you could have. It's certainly better than civil law, for instance.
Yes, that's something that's certainly an interesting debate we could have, and I don't know what Sharia law is at all. It's just just the law of, or how exactly that works. It just seems to be okay. But certainly I can't think of any country that is based on Sharia law that's civilized nowadays. So
yeah.
So it's I guess also from some of these countries it's very easy to just come into the UK because I guess the UK kind of gives you a blank check if you're part of the Commonwealth, right?
Well, I'm not sure being part of the Commonwealth is the criterion there, but you do see these stories where immigrants will be housed in some like fancy hotel and they'll be complaining that they're not getting enough caviar with their with their beef or
Yes.
whatever. Like there's a very big Gibbs culture over here, and it's seen in like the religion of the UK, which is the National Health Service. If you even suggest that maybe the NHS should be privatized, you'll be like, people will think you're insane. Even if you suggest that, well, maybe we shouldn't increase the budget so much this year, just increase it a little bit less. They'll be like, well, so you hate the NHS? What's wrong with you, right? And this is like, people are constantly screaming about like, oh, the Conservatives, they're privatizing the NHS. But if you look at the NHS budget throughout the entire Conservative reign, it keeps going up year after year after year. Like they're not privatizing anything. Like I bloody wish they were privatizing it. That'd be fantastic. And this is like something which is almost unconscionable to most Americans, that you'd have a socialist health service. It's awful. Like, I mean, I've been to hospitals before where I'm like going in with something fairly serious, and I'll be sitting in a waiting room for 18 hours. There'll be like people on beds out in the corridors and stuff. Like, it's completely horribly managed. And of course, you'd expect it to be horribly managed because it's a socialist health service, right?
Yes, of course. What's the general impression that the residents of the UK have of the National Health Service? I often hear that for them say, well, it's still the greatest thing in the world, but who knows?
Yeah, the general impression that people have is that it's the best idea that anybody's ever had, and it is absolutely wonderful. But it just needs more money. If it just wasn't underfunded, then it'd all be peachy and rainbows. And it's so uncivilized that other people have
Yeah.
to pay for their health service. That's the general attitude towards it. And like you saw this during the whole coronavirus thing.
Yeah.
People were going out every night banging pots and pans to celebrate the NHS. Like this is lunacy,
To celebrate the what?
The NHS. Like they would
Oh, the
just
NHS.
celebrate.
Oh,
Yeah. It's like, oh, there good doctors and nurses doing their job, banging pots and pans. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. What was the general attitude during all this, and what exactly happened? I mean, Britain go crazy? What did Britain do? Because there's of course Neil Ferguson, who I think is quite possibly the most evil Homo sapien on the face of the earth right now. Although he certainly got some competition, but
Yeah, so I think the big problem, like I suppose I'll go for the core issue at heart here, which is the fact that Britain is, of course, a European nation, and as your name's Fountainhead Forum, so I assume your audience is mostly objectivists, so they'll be aware of Leonard Peikoff. He did a history of
yes,
philosophy, and he's got like the whole his Omnis Parallels book, where the whole thesis is that Immanuel Kant, he brought in all this evil. He brought in, and I can speak on this at length if you want. He brought in all of the horrible collectivism and everything, which brought about people like Hitler and Marx and whatnot. And Europe was not very well insulated from this. There were like the British empiricists were at least better than the continental rationalists. Um, at least they believed that reality was a thing, but then they also turned out to be nominalists, and the nominalists, they have no defense against Immanuel Kant. Whereas over in the US, they were built on a philosophical tradition of people like John Locke and whatnot, where it's like, oh, it's individual rights and all this type of thing. So the US was a lot more insulated from the rationalism taking over Europe,
yes,
whereas UK not so much, and that's brought about all of the collectivism and whatnot.
yes.
We're not insulated at all.
I'm a bigger fan of Algernon Sidney, a great Englishman as well. But so who were the nominalists? So Locke, you're saying that Locke had more impact on America than he did on the UK.
Yeah, so the place where the British empiricists ended up with when we get into the Enlightenment was with David Hume, where
Yeah.
basically it leads you into total and utter skepticism. And the reason why you get into this total skepticism with David Hume is because of a new theory. I don't know if it's new. There were nominalists before, of course, but it's I'll say an in vogue theory of the sort of status that the problem of sort of the answer to the problem of universals, I'll phrase it as. So the idea was that when you have a universal like tree, where you're trying to describe all individual trees, right? That is just an arbitrary name that you're using. Like it doesn't actually exist. It's just a name for it. So it just stands in for a group of concretes. So if I say man is mortal, what I mean by man is list off every single man who lives, right? That is, and if you have nominalism, Peikoff has like a good lecture on this in his history of philosophy. If you have nominalism, then that is the sort of epistemic part, where I suppose the metaphysical part rather. Then you get to sensualism in epistemology, and sensualism is basically that the thesis that the only thing that your consciousness can do is to perceive things. That you only have the perceptual level. You don't have anything beyond that. You can't do anything except for sense something. And this sensualism, because of course you can't sense causality, you can't sense on the pure perceptual level, you can't get to any of these concepts, then you end up with the skepticism of David Hume. And that is the place, and the skepticism of David Hume cannot withstand the attacks of the new rationalists like Immanuel Kant and stuff like that. And that's how you get to the horrible situation in the UK overall.
That is interesting. So sensualist, and so you can't, and you also can't. Really, if you're just sensualist, you really don't have any mathematics either.
Yeah, like no abstract thought at all. It's the way they describe it is it's just a relation of ideas whenever you're going on these types of things. So if I say if I'm talking about how bachelors are unmarried men, that's just a relation of ideas. I'm just making a speech contract with you in some way, where I'm just gonna use bachelor in that way. And the same is true of all conceptual knowledge. The nominalists are very good at showing how any sort of conceptual knowledge, it's just an arbitrary name for standing in for a group of sense data, which, yeah, it wipes out mathematics, it wipes out even epistemology, on my view, it wipes out any sort of conceptual level thought. You're just, this is where you a materialist sort of sense organ, right?
That is interesting because I've not read Kant, but yeah, so I've kind of heard that some people do consider Hume to be somewhat of a villain in all this, or at least maybe not a villain on purpose, but just a person who kind of laid the groundwork to go and that took us down a path. I mean, I don't know. Where do you think, say, Francis Bacon, John Milton, or Adam Smith stand in all this?
Well, I think with all of the earlier you get towards the Renaissance, the better they are generally. But they do definitely lay the groundwork. I would have to go over my notes to give specifics on any of these guys, but you can see if you trace the line of British empiricists that it is going inevitably towards skepticism, and the step which was required to get it to skepticism was the nominalism.
Yeah, it seems that, and skepticism, and what is your definition of skepticism?
It's basically the but why epistemology. It is the rejection of knowledge if you take it really seriously. It is the sort of this mentality that people have where, oh, man can't know anything. We don't know any of this stuff. We don't know, right? That is the essence. And you get waves of skepticism throughout the history of philosophy. Because based on if there is some error brought in by a previous philosopher, then that error will be exploited and eventually it dissolves into skepticism, right? And whenever you have this wave of total skepticism, you need to get a new constructive period about.
Yeah.
And that constructive period could either be a sort of fiat constructive period with a Plato, or it could be an actual constructive period with an Aristotle. And after Hume, of course, we got another Plato, which is Immanuel Kant. And he drove us into another wave of skepticism. And then now we've got Ayn Rand, thankfully. So we've got a nice, proper constructive period going on.
Sometimes I think skepticism is really just the product of a low trust society. I mean, for example, I could say, well, how do I know that this really happened? Because I didn't see it with my own eyes. And if you, and that's going to be your attitude if you come to the conclusion that everybody around you is a liar. You end up having to, you can't take anything on, you can't trust anybody's word. You don't have any confidence in other people's words. And I don't want to use, I don't, when I say that, use this word, I don't mean religious, but I mean, you don't have any faith in anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, I think a free society does need a certain amount of non-religious faith, that mm-hmm. we can learn from people, that we can trust these experiments, that if some scientist reaches these conclusions, that we can trust that his data was okay. But nowadays, when it seems like everybody's a liar, that makes us all more skeptical, doesn't it?
I think skepticism is related to a low trust society, in the ways you described. But I think you reversed cause and effect. I think the philosophy is the fundamental. It's because of the skepticism that you can no longer trust people, and people are untrustworthy because they end up devolving as just being pragmatists, right? It's just, well, I'm going to do this, and it's going to work out for me, fine, right? Obviously not in a holistic sense, it won't. But they'll just adopt whatever position they want to suit them in the moment and whatever. And obviously, you couldn't trust a person like that. You can't trust a person to tell you the truth who thinks that the truth is an illusion, right?
Yeah, but also I don't also that when we're all born, we are very high trusting individuals. We have to be. We have to trust. We have to trust that mommy's going to change our diaper. We have to trust. I mean, you look at how children under 5 years old, they really do trust everybody, and they don't. And it's only through experience that they learn not to trust people, or they hear mommy or daddy say, don't talk to strangers, don't talk to it's things like that. So I mean, I would even say there's probably a tendency, just as people get older, to become more skeptical. And nowadays also with the internet, when there's so much noise on the internet and so much, rumor and innuendo, it's really gotten to a point, I think, where it's probably higher than it's ever been, because now anybody can say anything and put it out there, and other people can read it. And it's like, I could put out something saying Liquid Zulu is actually 700 years old, and he's also Francis Bacon, and you'd have to refute that, but it's just noise.
Mhm. And I think that is also based on the philosophy, because people don't have a good epistemology. They don't know which claims they should trust and which claims are arbitrary, and which ones should just be completely discounted and whatnot, right?
True, but sometimes you just you just have to examine the person too, whether or not you can trust those people. It's it's fair to say that the attitude in the UK is that it's not really pro-capitalist at all, right? I mean, there's
Oh yeah, like this is based also on the UK being a very old and very aristocratic type country. Whereas in the US, if you wanted to, there was a lot of attitude going around, especially in the original capital, New York. Like, people were there to make a buck. Like, they founded in New York because they wanted to make money. There's a very big respect for money over in the US, deep in the culture, whereas that's not the case over here. It's the respect is more for which kind of social class you're in and whatnot, and it's all about etiquette and politeness.
and it's kind of what you're born into. I mean, that's why I've often heard people say that Richard Branson really should be an American, for example.
Yeah,
And
he's a very American. I think the one way to describe that is he's a very Apollonian type individual, and I'm not using Apollonian in the Nietzschean sense. I'm using it in Ayn Rand's sense, where she has a great article on Apollo and Dionysus, it's called. And yeah, Richard Branson is definitely, he's got that charismatic American Apollonian type energy to him.
but he's also willing to do some crazy things, and try to take risks in business. He's built a few empires, he selling records, and I don't know if you have that many success stories in the UK like you do here over in the US.
Yeah, not really.
It's more frozen.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very stagnant economy going on over here. Like,
What it sounds like to me, though, is there's not as much social mobility either, though. It's not, a case where poor family becomes, in a few generations, it's a rich family, and then maybe back to a poor family. I'm afraid America's probably losing some of that too, but yeah, it's what's your take on Nigel Farage?
Well, I think he has his problems. He's not the ideal, but he is definitely far and away superior to any other British politician of the last few decades. So, I mean, that's why I voted for his party.
Yeah, what do you think? When do you think the groundwork was laid for this? I mean, we can go back to the 1800s and see that Britain really was that really was Britain's most prosperous time, when Britain was just this powerful country and was doing so many things and advancing so quickly. When do you think the groundwork? When do you think this started to unravel?
I think it was due to Kant, and also just there had been a brain drain from the UK especially, and also the rest of Europe, towards America for quite some time already. So the UK was
Yeah.
just not in a position to resist Immanuel Kant, and then it turned into just pure collectivism.
As much as we talk about, certainly talking about Ayn Rand, but I sometimes, and while I don't know what he ever wrote politically, but it often seems to me that maybe the most socialist, or the person who promoted socialism in the UK more than anybody, was Dickens. Because he's always got these, stories about how horrible life is for poor people, and how somebody, a character like Ebenezer Scrooge, and all this stuff, and without realizing that poverty. I mean, what's your take on Dickens?
Well, yeah, I mean, you pointed out there he's an altruist through and through,
Yeah.
and this comes through in his fiction, and I think you get art like that when you have the bad philosophy, because art is just a concretization of whatever philosophy the artist has. So yeah, I think it is the bad philosophy which is coming in and causing all these problems.
Yeah. Who are some of the other good people you think that were good philosophers in England? I mean, people have told me that I should read Adam Smith's Theory of Moral Sentiments. What's your general take on Adam Smith?
I very much doubt that he's got anything good in morality. To be fair to him, there are very few philosophers who are halfway good. It's basically only Aristotle, and then Aquinas was good because he resurrected Aristotle in the West, and then Ayn Rand. Right? It's the history of philosophy is very dismal, at least up until
Yeah.
now.
You had nothing to say about Bacon, or I mean, I've read some Francis Bacon. I found it.
I mean, he's probably better than at the very least Immanuel Kant, right? If we're comparing to Kant, then it's hard to get much worse. But people managed, after him.
Thomas Jefferson had three pictures, and he said these are the three greatest. I think the three greatest minds of all time, and he had Francis Bacon, John Locke, and Isaac Newton.
I'm not familiar too much with Bacon off by heart. Well, what is it that you kind of pulls you to him?
I just remember reading him years ago. I don't remember that much about him, though, and that Jefferson was certainly an admirer of him, and Thomas Jefferson was, I think, really, I would call him a great American philosopher. I think he certainly, while he wasn't perfect, certainly had some ideas which laid the groundwork for what America has become.
I mean, so if he inspired Jefferson, then he will have been one of the earlier empiricists, so probably better than what was to come.
Yeah. It's are there any good English philosophers right now, or is it just kind of drifting right now?
Yeah, none that I know of.
Who are some people, in your opinion, that were very good proponents of freedom in English history? I mean, I've heard different stories about Disraeli and Gladstone, or who are some other heroes you think in English history, or British history? I'm sorry.
I think there are individual heroic moments here and there, like Gladstone you mentioned. Like there has been, like at least in the past, kind of pushes against absolutism, which have occurred in the UK, but nothing really on the scale of what you get over in America.
Oh, also Richard Cobden. Yeah, he was one of the because he was helped get rid of the Corn Laws, which I believe were largely, at least, responsible for the Irish potato famine. Is there any kind of liberty movement going on in England, in the UK right now?
There is There is the Scottish Libertarian Party, which I'm a member of. Very small. It's always under the other category when you're looking at the parties. Right.
Yeah.
It's there's also the UK Libertarian Party, which doesn't operate in Scotland because they have a deal with each other because the Electoral Commission won't allow two Libertarian parties on the same ballot. I don't know how big the UK Libertarian Party is. Apart from that, I think it's really only Students for Liberty, and I'm not sure if you've seen it on Twitter the past while. Students for Liberty has basically been taken over and is ousting all the libertarians, so I don't know how long they'll stay around.
Yeah, I'm hearing things like that. Also, isn't there also the Institute for Economic Affairs? Or
Yes, I think that's London, right?
I think so, but I've also heard that they. I've also heard that they kind of sold out on the big bad virus, but I could be wrong.
And there's also Ayn Rand Center UK, I believe it's called.
Yes, the Ayn Rand Center UK. What do you think of the Objectivist movement right now?
It has a pretty major problem in that there's a lot of what I call zombie objectivism going around, which is where objectivism is just whatever Ayn Rand said, and we'll stick with Ayn Rand, and don't you dare even try to innovate upon this philosophy. And this has led to, especially in the politics, some pretty severe errors going on. But I'm fixing this at the moment. I don't know how successful I'll be, but I'm certainly going to give it my best shot. We need to have anarchism incorporated with objectivism, where instead of answering the question of law, which is the wrong, the question of politics, which is the wrong question, we need to answer the question of law, i.e., what am I allowed to do with respect to you, and given that there's scarcity. That is the question that law is trying to answer, and that doesn't bring in this how do you organize society things. What is a society, right? It's a group of individuals. We need to answer this on the individual level.
Yeah, that is interesting. It seems like zombie objectivism is a good word for it. We're just rehashing what Ayn Rand said. We're not really contributing anything new or doing any new research. Where do you think there are any other? What do you think are some of the political errors right now?
Well, a big one is intellectual property. Of course, Ayn Rand, not a lawyer, not very well versed in law, and she just took people's word for it that there's such a thing as intellectual property, even though it's not a property right, right? It wasn't even introduced as being a property right. It was introduced as a negative easement. It was a letter of patent, right, from the Queen, which says, hey, you're allowed to do this and nobody else is allowed to do it, right? It's a literal monopoly grant. And she just accepted wholesale the propaganda that there's some sort of property right. It's not a property right, right? Property rights exist because there's scarcity and because you can come into conflicts over things. That's why you need to assign property rights in the first place. So it's just not possible to have a property right in ideas. And another angle on this, which is more perhaps objectivist, is that the idea doesn't actually exist, right? It's just in your head, right? Concepts don't exist out there. Only physical things exist out there. So it's only over physical things that you can have conflicts. You can't have a conflict over an idea.
Yeah, sometimes I think the best thing that could ever happen for objectivism right now would be as if all the copyrights expired.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
The other thing too is all that stuff would be published everywhere, and it would be out there, and because you get so many people who lie about what Ayn Rand said, and they put these articles out on the net, but now you can't link to something to refute them because all of this stuff is still only stuff that can be bought. What are some other big errors? For example, I mean, the anarchism thing certainly is something I find interesting. I mean,
yeah, so I think the reason why you get that error, because I think it is an error to endorse the state, I can discuss that further. The reason for this error is because, like, I think Peikoff highlights it very well, unintentionally. If you read his section on politics and OPAR, he says, like, oh, well, what politics is trying to answer is, what is the proper way to organize society? I'm paraphrasing here, by the way. What is the proper way to organize society, including what are the proper functions of government? Well, I mean, there you go. You've just done it right there. You've assumed that there should be a government and it should have certain functions, right? Because you would never say that the question that I'm trying to answer here is, what is the proper way to commit murder? Right? Because then I'm assuming that you should be committing murder in the first place. So this is the wrong question. The correct question is to go, well, there is this, when we're out here doing our stuff, right, being productive, we notice that there's such a thing called scarcity, which means that I can't use the same thing that you're using for a different purpose at the same time, right? That thing is scarce. It's rivalrous, in another word. And so then and if we try to do it, then we'd be in what is called a conflict, which is mutually exclusive actions. So how do we deal with conflicts? That is the question that law tries to answer. And there are three basic ways you could answer this question. You could either say, well, who cares about conflicts? We'll just do whatever the hell we want. Might makes right, yada, 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 right? So on and so forth. That's obviously whim worship. That's obviously out. Another option you might have is the non-aggression principle, which is, well, you shouldn't initiate any conflicts. The person who initiates the conflict should not be the one who has the property right over the thing in question. That's what I accept. And it implies complete and total anarchism. And then you might have a mix between the two, right? You might be, well, sometimes you should aggress, sometimes you shouldn't aggress. And in my view, that also devolves into whim worship and the primacy of consciousness, and it's also out. So the only reasonable option for any objectivist is the non-aggression principle and be a complete anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah. So there aren't any states out there that you think are good or really doing anything good right now.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's possible for a state to do good, because insofar as the state is doing anything, it's doing something criminal. It's the whole idea with the seen and the unseen, right? Wherever you have a state do literally even the tiniest little nubbin of a state, if it's there, then it's already misallocating resources. There are already problems, and like you'll hear certain Randians where they'll describe what they think their state is, and there's a lot of divergence between what they're suggesting. Of course, because they're not actually basing this on any fundamental principle. They're just trying to remember whatever Ayn Rand said in one lecture or whatever. I've heard this before from Randians, where they'll say, like, oh no, the state is completely voluntary state we want. The taxation is completely voluntary. And I was like, well, okay, well, could I then set up an alternative firm which also provides security services?
Yes.
I was like, well, yes, of course you can. You can do self-defense, you can do this sort of stuff, which is, by the way, already contradicting certain Randians. And it's like, well, then what exactly makes this different from anarcho-capitalism? What makes your state a state at that point? If I can set up a competing firm and do the same thing, like, are you just expecting people to donate to your state out of altruism? Like, this is nonsense. And one other position I've heard on this, which is contradicted by the previous one, is that, well, you need a monopoly on who's providing the law. So the state is the one which provides the law, and then everybody else can enforce it as much as you want, and you can have competition enforcement. It's like, okay, well, then the false premise there is that you need somebody to provide the law. That law needs to be produced in some way. Like, where else do you see this anywhere in the philosophy, but especially in ethics? Like, do we need someone to produce ethics? Do we need someone to produce virtues? Like, no. Production is itself a virtue based on the philosophy. Like, nowhere else in philosophy does somebody need to produce what it is that people are doing. Like, you don't have to write it down for people to know what they should do. They can figure it out on their own, and if they're wrong, then they'll be doing bad things, right? This is a complete divergence from the entire rest of everything that she said, right?
I often realize that mathematics is the perfect form of anarchy, because you have a structure, you have rules, but you have no rulers. But everybody agrees on the rules, and if you could just get people to agree, for example, on basic political rules, without having rulers, I think we would all have a very good situation here. I mean, so, I am curious. For the last 10 months, the Ayn Rand Center UK has been talking almost exclusively about one topic. I think you know what topic I'm talking about. What do you think about that?
Um, well, assuming it's the topic I'm thinking of, I
Israel.
really, yeah, I really don't care. Like, I don't care how many dirt people are bombing other dirt people on the other side of the planet than me. Like, and I think people they get their panties in a twist about Israel and Palestine for no real reason that I can see. Unless you're like Israeli or Palestinian or you know one. Like I don't see why to get in a huff about it. Like there are always wars going on. There are always these things happening. It doesn't seem to affect me in any which way. And I don't see why I should like devote even a moment of my time to consider it to like going over like property maps and discovering who's right or whatever. Like I don't care about it.
How did you get in Ayn Rand? How did you get into libertarianism?
So I got into libertarianism because I saw John Stossel videos in my recommended, and he was like saying all sorts of stuff, and I was like, well, I gotta check this out. Um, then he convinced me. I also saw then a Michael Moreno video. I was subscribed to Michael Moreno. He was like, he's deleted his channel by this point, but he had like this video where he and a friend got like booted out of a debate competition for citing Jordan Peterson. He did another video
Oh,
where he said that the Supreme Court LGBT ruling, like where it would be like anti-discrimination, he said that that was immoral, and this was a position I hadn't ever heard, and he completely convinced me of it. I joined his Discord server, and there's anarcho-capitalists on there. He convinced me of anarcho-capitalism by telling me to read a book, which is over on my bookshelf. That, and then I was an ANCAP, and then I met somebody who was an objectivist, and he convinced me to watch Leonard Peikoff's History of Philosophy, and that convinced me of objectivism.
yeah. When was this about?
It's hard. It's hard. Like, coronavirus has just completely thrown off my clock of how many years things have been. I think it was probably a couple of years though.
Okay, because you can probably tell I'm older.
Yeah.
I think I've always been a libertarian, but I discovered Ayn Rand in 1992, and I've got to tell you, go back to the 90s. The Ayn Rand Institute, all of these organizations, they said they were hardly talking about Israel at all. I mean, even Ayn Rand herself never said anything or wrote anything publicly about Israel until 1974. After the World Trade Center, the movement completely went nuts, and I think also, what you were saying about zombie objectivism, I think, when also, it seems like to me when a movement or something like this gets bored and they don't have anything else to do, since they can't, they suddenly find these tangents and take up a cause. I mean, it's absolutely embarrassing for me what's happened to the objectivist movement. It really is right now. That they've gotten so far behind, and there were some good people in objectivism that were not really in favor of this. Chris Matthews Scabar is not. Tibor McCann wasn't. But it's now just become. I don't know if objectivism will ever recover from this brand damage.
I think it can. I'm perhaps more white-pilled on this, because all that is required is to fix, these few little errors, and then you've got the ideal perfect philosophy through and through, and that is going to catch on like wildfire, unless a new Plato comes around, basically, because the skeptics, the pragmatists, these descendants of Kant, they don't have the tools to actually fight against a new powerful philosophy like that, unless it eats itself, which it will, unless somebody cures the zombies, right?
Yeah, the zombies are, as you pointed out, are definitely an issue. I do wonder, also, who's funding these organizations? Are they being paid off to do this? It seems like to me that could be an issue. UK is especially interesting because it seems like they're doing it more. I mean, I don't know if Ayn Rand is as big in the UK as she is over there. You know, I mean,
Not really.
yeah, it's and I don't know what her popularity level is in Israel either. It's is the liberty movement and objectivism also pretty much overwhelmingly male like it is in America?
As far as I can tell, yes. But I have heard that there are at like objectivist conferences, there's generally way more women than at libertarian conferences, and it's probably because Ayn Rand was, of course, herself a woman. So
Yeah.
you
Well, some places where you actually will see as many women or possibly even more women. I've noticed it when I visited two of the Caucasus countries. Uh, the guy from the Ayn Rand Center, Armenia, that guy puts pictures up, and there's always more women in those pictures, and I'm just amazed. I mean, he had one picture where it was 16:8. I mean, I said, okay, you're doing something right here. I don't know what you're doing, and I don't know if maybe it's because those countries are a little more backward, but it's or maybe it's because they haven't been taken over by modern stuff like things have now. I mean, are there any other? We did mention Nigel Farage. You said he wasn't perfect. Are there any other people in English politics or British politics or even European politics that you think are pretty good right now?
Farage is the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
If we're speaking at least of politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or perhaps in the media,
Well, of course, I'm in Europe, so myself, it's scarce to find someone who is even close to the truth in Europe.
It almost seems like also what's considered the right wing is actually very bad in Europe as well. They pretty much surrendered on everything. They're just 10 or 20 years behind, but they don't really want to go back. I mean, you're probably not a fan of Churchill, but I think Churchill would probably be completely embarrassed to see what his country is now.
And he brought it about by by bringing about the whole war economy and helping out the collectivism a bit.
I've certainly talked to American libertarians about what they think about World War II. What's your whole take on World War II?
Well, from the British perspective, I think we should have just stayed out. I mean, Hitler was never planning to invade the United Kingdom, so we should just gone like, oh, all right, well, stay back, right? Because I mean, obviously, Hitler was a bad guy, but also Stalin was a bad guy as well. So I'm not sure, how are we weighing up which is the badder guy? And that, of course, is not the standard they were using. They weren't using the standard of, oh, Hitler's such a meanie, so we got to take him out. That's like kind of a Hollywood fiction, right? They were using the standard of, it was a power grab. It's like, well, if we ally with the Russians in the east, then we can have a pincer on Hitler and maybe get some more territory, help out our allies more. It was all about a power game, right? It was never about, oh, he's just so evil, so we got to deal with him, right? That's just propaganda.
Yeah, and I guess you'd probably say the same thing about World War I as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, how do you think things might be different if Britain never gets involved? I mean, if Britain never gets involved in World War I suppose America never gets involved, and World War I might end up just maybe being a stalemate.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see. I mean, if Britain never got involved in World War One, then you would definitely never get the EU, for instance. Like the EU is a result of World War Two. And yeah, I think you would just end up with like it would just be another European power struggle. Like it's because everybody decided to jump in on it that became a world war. Like it could have just been, France versus Germany around 16,000, right?
Yeah, and do you think there, and I mean, what also happens, with the Bolsheviks and the Soviet Union? I mean, how's that different too? And of course, my memory is right. Karl Marx did spend a lot of time in London, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he died in London.
Yeah. Also, there's certainly who are some of the great, the really big British villains. Uh,
Currently, it would be the Conservative Party, of course. They're all
yeah.
horrible.
Mhm.
The SNP, which is the Scottish Nationalist Party,
Yeah.
they're pretty villainous.
Yeah.
Labour, I don't like Labour. I mean, name a politician, they're probably a villain.
What
Yeah.
well, okay, I'm thinking more intellectual. I mean, what would you say, for example, about George Bernard Shaw or Bertrand Russell?
Oh yeah, I very much dislike Russell. Harry Binswanger has some good videos on Russell, explaining how horrible he did mathematics.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm not really. I don't know if I've really read or consumed anything Ben Swanger produced. Uh, nope. Any opinions on Shaw or
Which one was Shaw again?
George Bernard Shaw?
Yeah, what did he do?
I believe he was a playwright mostly.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with his work, so can't say.
Yeah. Yeah, he was. Yep. Actually, he was Irish. He was he was born in Dublin, but then ended up in England. But yeah, uh, and even anybody, you said Churchill was a villain. I don't know what do you think about Chamberlain? Neville Chamberlain
I mean, he
or
seems
Lloyd
fairly.
George.
I think basically all I know of Chamberlain is from like propaganda, so I don't know if I can really speak on him. But as far as I can tell, he seems fairly spineless. But again, that would be, of course, the propaganda you'd go for if you wanted to show that Britain should get involved in the war, right? So I can't speak on him. And what was the other guy you said?
Lloyd George. He was World War One.
Yeah, not familiar with him.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much you knew about the history of Britain. So, I mean, certainly. Have you ever watched any of Darren Brown's videos?
Yes, he's the hypnotist guy, right?
Hypnotist mentalist. Yeah, I think he's absolutely brilliant. He's not hardly known in America at all, but
Yeah.
I discovered him a long time ago, and he's just. I like he gets in with the cab driver and makes the cab driver forget where the London Eye is. Just confuses him. The cab driver's like lost. The London Eye. It's basically a Ferris wheel. I mean, it's like you can't miss this thing, but he suddenly can't find it. It's so wild. Yeah. So, um, getting back to it. I mean, we were on, as you said, zombie objectivism. Do you think what do you have any opinions on what could be done to fix the objectivism movement? Because I'm still kind of wondering. I don't meet very many people who call themselves objectivists, unfortunately, who aren't solely cheerleading for Israel, because the movement is still so tribalist and just everybody just follows whatever the leaders say.
Yeah. So basically, the way to fix it is to preach correct objectivism, and then get enough clout to make it such that this is a real contender. So basically, just what I'm already doing, right? If I'm already getting like more YouTube views than a lot of these institute videos. So I'm already on the right path. If I can get those views to be consistently high, then it's a real thing that they've got to contend with, right?
You certainly had some interesting stuff on your channel too. I saw, you're talking about You don't think David Friedman's an anarcho-capitalist, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he doesn't actually have any ethical or legal theory at all. So it becomes impossible for him to identify what the state is in the first place, right? Because he can't just say, he says like, oh, well, a state is non-market. Well, what does non-market mean? Does it mean aggression? Well, he doesn't believe in the non-aggression principle, so that's going to go, right? He can't identify it at all, because the way you normally identify a state is by its violation of the property rights would be involved there, right? But he can't do that because property rights arise on the market for him. Right? It's a non-starter.
Yeah, that's interesting. And yeah, he also had this, about Dave Smith and open borders.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was a big thing. He refused to debate me outright. One of the copes he went for not debating me was that I'm just so irrelevant. Like, he doesn't have time to be dealing with an irrelevant person like me. But then you'll look him up on YouTube, and you'll be going on to channels which average like 10 views a video or something. Like, my if you take my top video, it would break into, and this isn't even the top video I've ever done. I had to private the top video I ever done. The top video that's currently public, it is within Dave's top 5 view counts that he's ever gotten. So it's like, and I didn't need to get fucking Vivek Ramaswamy on to do it, right?
Now, this is something that really worries me about the American liberty movement. Why are so many American libertarians, especially, becoming advocates of, we'll build the wall? And I'm just thinking like, well, I don't want to build the wall because I want to be able to leave. I mean, you've talked about coming to America, which is probably an improvement over anything in Western Europe, but I'm still like, I'm not, it's not that easy to come here.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you have to say, about open borders?
Yeah. So the main argument for open borders is just that the state doesn't have a property right to the territory that it's closing the borders of.
Yeah.
Because it's not even just like, they'll sometimes have a cope like, well, what if they just control just the borderland? It's like, no, that doesn't work, because the closed borders types are also they're against immigration in total. Right. So even if I took a helicopter and dropped down in the middle of nowhere in Nevada or whatever, then I'd be evicted, right? I'd be deported. So what they have to maintain is that the government actually owns the entire contiguous United States, and they can tell who's allowed to be there and who's not. There are two problems with that. First, they haven't homesteaded the entire contiguous United States. Like, that has never occurred. And second, a group cannot have a property right. So the group, which is the United States government, can't have a property right over anything. It's simply not possible. The reason for this, I go over this in my more fully in my course on libertarian ethics, which you can find in the description of my channel and whatnot. It's, if you have, let's just assume that there's a group of people, A through Z, and we say that they all own a single stick, right? There's common group ownership over this stick. Well, what happens if A wants to use the stick to spearfish and B doesn't want this to happen? Well, either the spearfishing happens or it doesn't. Let's say that our property theory says that the spearfishing should go forth. Well, that means that A does indeed own the stick, but B doesn't, because B is not allowed to prevent A from using the stick. Okay, so that contradicts our initial assumption that B does own the stick. So let's say the spearfishing doesn't happen. Same reasoning would then lead us to A doesn't own the stick, which contradicts the presumption that A owns the stick. So you simply, no matter which option you pick, if there is an internal conflict within the group, you are going to get a contradiction. And contradictions cannot be allowed in our property theory. So any group property notion is completely out. So the US government simply can't own the contiguous United States. So therefore, open borders.
Yeah, that's certainly a pretty much a good way to sum it up. I do wonder, how we got to this point. How much do you pay attention to what's happening with the liberty movement in America right now? I mean, I got to ask too. What do you think of Michael Malice? I think he's probably one of the best advocates for liberty out there today right now.
Yeah, I think Malice does a very good job at getting anarchism in front of some very big audiences. Like that is undeniable that he is very, very good at that, and he's able to get most people like kind of nodding along. You know, normally they don't completely agree, but they're at least nodding along. I consider him to be a little bit better on theory than Dave Smith. I consider Dave Smith to be very bad on theory, but I don't think Michael Malice is like a theory head or anything. He's definitely more of like a pop anarchism kind of guy, you might want to call it. Like he's a popularizer of it. But insofar as his popularization activities go, I think he's very good. Though I would prefer if he was more theoretically precise, you know. But there's no denying how successful he's been in getting anarchism even spoken about.
Yeah, that's might be a good thing. I think it helps too that he's often very funny and has this sardonic. He's smart. He he's principled without being angry. He's he's got this sarcasm about him. I mean, I think he's a very good ambassador. You know, and while I don't know, you know, if you speak other languages, but if you've looked at my channel, you've noticed that I've done over 200 shows now, and I've also done 50 shows talking about Javier Milei. Do you have an opinion on Javier Milei right now?
Oh yes, I think it's brilliant that Milei was elected. I did like a live stream. I believe it's on the Springtime of Nations channel, where we were going over it. We like stayed up all night for the Milei election. We did not expect him to win at all. We were like, oh yeah, he's probably going to get a pretty good result, but probably not winning. Then when he won, it was like, holy shit, he kept all the votes kept coming in. We're like, oh my god, it's happening. Like, I mean, Milei, you know, he's not, he's not super theoretically precise, but I mean, he does understand the theory. I would say, as far as I can tell, like he's studied Austrian economics, he's studied Murray Rothbard, he's studied all these things, and he definitely has a great respect for anarcho-capitalism. Like that's a big win. Like I mean, people like to kind of snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, where they're like, oh, but you know, he's maybe he isn't like completely perfect on this thing. It's like, come on, we can class Milei as a win. I think if we can't class Milei as a win, there's nothing we can class as a win.
I think what the first thing I did, you know, in fact, you know, yesterday October was 13th of August was the first anniversary of the primary victory. That was really the first time I think people started paying attention to Milei. Although there were, you know, basically 3 rounds of voting, but and it was soon after I started doing shows. But there was this realization that Milei is actually doing the philosophical re-education that Ayn Rand talked about that's necessary. And she said you have to do the philosophical re-education before you get involved with politics. But he has changed that, because he said, okay, I'm going to do the philosophical re-education while I run for office.
Mm-hmm. It's the Ron Paul strategy. Like he's executed it brilliantly.
Well, Ron Paul was mostly about war, and also I think you got to say Ron Paul's impact on America is almost nothing, unfortunately.
I'm not so sure. Like, I mean, you know, you'll speak to a lot of libertarians, who got their start because Ron Paul brought up. It's the remnant strategy, and Milei has done that fantastically. He was a great reach of the remnant, and he won.
But Milei has gotten out there so much more than Ron Paul ever did. I mean, it's I think the fact that Milei was a lead singer of a Rolling Stone cover band, he was also a soccer player, so he knew how to be one of the cool kids. And libertarianism has not attracted very many people who are considered the cool kids. And if the vote had been only under 30, he would have won overwhelmingly. I mean, it's just so. That's something I might consider. Incidentally, also, you know, you were talking about leaving the UK. Have you looked into Monte Libero?
No.
Monte Libero is something. It's like the Free State Project, but it's in Montenegro.
Ah, yes, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, you might want to take a look at that. I don't know. if you did come, you have talked about coming to America. If you did come to America, would you go to New Hampshire and go to the Free State Project, or?
Yes, that's the plan currently.
And that probably wouldn't be much of an adjustment on weather, would it?
Yeah, no, I was in Florida for YALCon, and I didn't realize how hot things could get. Like I felt like I was in a goddamn oven. So yeah, definitely I'm going to be staying up to the northern states.
You were just at YALCon?
Yeah.
I don't know what, either I didn't learn about it soon enough or whatever, but after learning about that, I think I learned about it like 2 weeks beforehand. I'm thinking like, oh man, I wish I'd went to this. Look at all these cool people that showed up here. And you were there, and Kyle Rittenhouse was there, and other people, like quite a few people I'd like to meet. So. By the way, I also learned too that Milei will be at CPAC Mexico in about a week, and I think it's actually about a week and a half, Mexico City. So that's I haven't decided. I haven't fully made a commitment, but I drive down to San Antonio. That's 2 hours by plane for me. That's no big deal.
Yeah, you might as well go see him.
2 hours by plane, and I can pick. San Antonio has better options going to Mexico City, but I can choose from 3 airlines down there, but yeah. So that means it's never going to be overpriced. But it's I might do that just because he's there. But anyway, so yeah, I think the philosophical re-education part is just absolutely brilliant. I mean, I think it could be. I assume that all of the college professors in the UK are also a bunch of socialists, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I won't say all of them. There are some.
Yeah.
Like I've met some good people, but for the most part, I mean, I remember when I was doing a physics lecture one time, and the lecturer, she was like, "Oh, by the way, I won't be in next time, because I'm doing a climate change strike."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I'm here to learn physics from you, lady. I'm not here to engage in your fucking environmentalist communism. All right.
Yeah. Well, what's also interesting? The place where socialism is least popular is in the economics departments. I mean, that's
I suppose they've got their own kind of socialism with Keynes, right? Though.
Well, Keynes, yeah, that's another. We're talking about villains in the history of your country. We certainly got to talk about him.
Oh yeah. It's weird that I think Hayek was friends with Keynes, wasn't he? Or like they had some sort of like academic relationship at least.
I'm not sure. Hayek spent quite a bit of time in the UK, didn't he, or not?
Yes, I think he was at the London economic. I can't remember the School of Economics. I think it is LSE.
Yeah.
But they all turned to Keynes after a while.
Another thing I got to say, getting economics. This is another thing too that I found interesting about the current state of the objectivist movement. When I got involved with, I said I read Ayn Rand in 1992, and I was amazed when I went to these seminars how many objectivists had already had. When I first met them, like in 1995, I met a lot of them who already had email for several years. They were really on top of things like making websites, getting on email. And I find it very interesting now in the objectivist movement that I see so little interest in Bitcoin. I don't know what your take is on Bitcoin, but also it's like there's no, objectivists were always trying to at least, be on the cutting edge. And yet now they're not even really embracing the new things that much. It's really wild.
Yeah, I suppose I like Bitcoin. I was a very, very early adopter of Bitcoin, but I did the silly thing, which everybody says, oh, at least they used to. It was like, oh, it'll be safer if you store it with some company. I was like, okay, I'll store it with some company. I had a decent amount of Bitcoin like way, way early, and it was all stolen from me. So I've lost like a lot of money on Bitcoin. I was gonna sell. I was like, oh yes, this is gonna be a peak. I was right. I was like a week off from the peak. We logged in to go sell the Bitcoin, And sure enough, they've got like an announcement up saying, "Sorry, we've lost all your Bitcoin." Like, my God. But yes, I think it is a great technology. I think if your viewers are interested, there's a video by MRH Legacy on the history of money, where he goes over the whole progression towards Bitcoin. I think it's a pretty solid argument he provides there on why Bitcoin is a good contender for money.
All right. Would you consider yourself only a Bitcoiner, or have you looked into Monero or some of the which is more private, or some of the other things?
I mean, I do have a Monero wallet just in case, because some people prefer to, pay me in Monero because they care about the privacy thing. I don't like Monero because it's hard to offload, and also like it's not, it doesn't have the first mover advantage is the big thing. So I don't think it's gonna be money. And I think most of my savings right now are actually in silver, because I can just store silver myself in a safe, and I don't have to worry about it. Um, but yeah, I do have some Bitcoin on hand.
Yeah, I just wondered, because sometimes, when I hear what I call orthodox Bitcoiners talk, they remind me a lot of orthodox objectivists 30 years ago. It's like all these other, like Leonard Peikoff might have said, all these other people who call themselves objectivists are frauds. And Bitcoiners will say all these other cryptocurrencies are frauds. I mean, the tone and the attitude is just, it's almost exactly the same thing. It's wild. And I'm just thinking, like, you guys don't want to end up like the objectivist movement in 30 years. That's what I want to warn them. It's
what I do find quite funny about the orthodox objectivists is there's
Yeah.
this video on YouTube. Like, I'll have to pull it up after this interview to send it to you. It's very funny, where like somebody's like edited together clips of your own Brook like contradicting himself on like whether or not you can be an objectivist, and disagrees like, oh well, of course it's a new philosophy. Objectivists can disagree on things, and then it's like him like screaming, "You are not an objectivist if you vote for Trump." Da, 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 da. And then at the end, it has Leonard Peikoff saying like, "I'm voting for Trump." It's like, it's very, very funny. So your own Brook just completely undercut there and
Yeah.
destroyed.
I don't get that. Yeah, it's there's always been this thing where we have to get involved with people who we think can win or whatever. It's the relationship between objectivism and the American Libertarian Party has never been good. And I put almost all of the blame on this on objectivists, but I also feel like sometimes the libertarians also have their issues too, and I can see why.
And I can speak on some of those issues as far as I see them.
Well,
Because
no, for example, when I've had dealings with people working with objectivist organizations, for example, they seem like the kind of people who will show up on time for meetings. If they say they'll call you at 3:00, they call you at 3:00. Whereas if I'm working with people in the Libertarian Party or something like that, who knows?
Yeah. And I think one big kind of tension comes from the fact that Mises was at least ostensibly Kantian. So a lot of the Austrian school is now Kantian. So that is obviously going to create some tension with the objectivists. And also, of course, there was the big dispute between Rothbard and Ayn Rand. So that's kind of, so if you are getting into it through the Rothbardian circles, you hear like, oh, Ayn Rand, she's just some cultist, right? She was mean to Rothbard, so I don't want to deal with Ayn Rand, right? So definitely we need to just let these kind of disputes of the past go to the wayside, and not continue to hamper the development of the philosophy.
I would love to have seen what could have happened if Rand and Rothbard could have worked together. I think they really could have brought some in, done some interesting work. The other amazing thing about Rothbard is I'm just amazed at how prolific he was. I mean, the books, the writing. I mean, the guy just was, he was like Stephen King. He just kept churning out words and words and words and words and more words. whether it be articles or books or whatever, just it's like, how did you put out all this stuff, Murray? It's like, wow, that's, and academic work isn't always easy too, because you got to do all those footnotes and all that other stuff. It's just, Rothbard might not have been the greatest libertarian ever, but I might very well say that he was the greatest libertarian scholar.
Yeah, and like according to, I believe, Walter Block, like all of these like really fast like Rothbard, where you just like send out words really quickly and like have like an article ready. Apparently, for the most part, it was just first draft stuff, and it was just already good. So it's like, like that's a very special skill, to be able to first draft just something brilliant, and that is like that's what you get with Rothbard.
That's something too. I hear about, for example, in things like the romance novel industry and stuff like that, especially with ebooks. It's just gotten to the point where the only way you really make money is that if you just keep putting out stuff as much as possible. So you put out, one short story every day or something like that, and it's so you basically have to make sure that your first draft is good, which for most people isn't the case. But if you can come up, if your first draft is always really good, that's a pretty amazing accomplishment. Because I think that's one thing. People talk about how long Ayn Rand took to write her books. If she was somewhat of a perfectionist, because you can go over a novel, especially now if you work in the days of word processing, you could redo your novel re-edit your novel 20 or 30 times before you're satisfied with it. It's that's so also and so I'm also curious, what you got any opinions on Nathaniel Branden?
He's done some very good work, I think. Like his lecture on free will is like a very, very concise and convincing presentation on the objectivist argument, and also like the work he's done on psychology. Like he's done some very good work. He deserves, I think, respect within the objective circles. Of course, there was a dispute between him and Rand, so a lot of that is,
all of this was over stupid stuff. I mean, Rand and Rothbard, it was apparently because Rothbard's wife was Christian and she wouldn't, and Rothbard stayed married to her, and of course Rand and Branden just the end of the affair, and in some ways I've often said that a lot of these people have a moment where they jump the shark, where they're doing good work and then they just stop doing good work and they stop being productive and they kind of become more of a liability than an asset. And I think sometimes maybe 1968 was when Ayn Rand jumped the shark, or at least that's when things were kind of just started going downhill and didn't really do much of anything else after that. But to his credit, I think Branden, in some ways, that was a blessing for him, because he went off and did his own thing and put out more books and really had more of an impact on people. And not to mention, it's kind of funny, but I remember back in the 90s, I think, look at these people are into Nathaniel Branden. They're crazy. And now I'm looking at people like, boy, these people who read all those Nathaniel Branden books have really done some interesting things.
Yeah.
Anybody else that would call themselves objectivists that you think is sounds like you've read a lot of them. I don't know if you've read Chris Matthew Scabara or some others like.
I'm not familiar with that one, but one I am very looking forward to read at some point is J. Michael Oliver. This is a guy like way back in the day tried engaging in the philosophical project that I'm doing right now, where he wanted to bring together anarcho-capitalism and objectivism. Like, brilliant! I gotta read that fucking book. Like that's the exact project that I'm currently engaged in, and he's still alive as well. Like he does like financial, like sort of advising stuff, I think.
Yeah, he's an interesting guy. That's somebody I'd like to, if I could get a hold of him, have him on the shows. There's a J. Michael Oliver. Yeah, some of the people who are involved back in the old days, involved in the older days, do seem to have some very interesting perspectives. They've seen how things have, you know, another guy like Roger E. Bissell, some other people are involved. Yeah, Skabara wrote. By the way, you don't know Skabara. Skabara wrote a book that was published in the '90s called Ayn Rand, the Russian Radical, and he looked at some of the origins of Rand's ideas. It was not well received by the ARI crowd, but people in David Kelly's wing were very enthusiastic about it. So they thought that was basically, how some of the people who might have influenced Ayn Rand in Russia when she was a student over there. It's hard to say. Also too, I got to ask. What do you think about Nietzsche?
So I think I haven't read him, but I've seen Peikoff's I've listened to Peikoff's lecture on him, and at least as far as Peikoff's account is, he seems very kind of eclectic. Like I can't see a real good through line for Nietzsche. Like I don't think he's properly systematized or integrated his philosophy. But of course, because he's eclectic, he does have some very good points. If he is his whole idea of his egoism is based on a package deal. So sometimes when he's on the right side of that package, he's talking about like the Ubermensch as being like a productive individual, like a Randian hero. He's saying some really good stuff, and he's got some great polemics against religion and whatnot. But his then sometimes he'll bring in, and then also there are great white hordes who need to kill all the Untermensch and rule over them, and it's like, well, I mean, come on, man.
Yeah. Well, some cases too, also apparently Nietzsche was one of the earlier people who predicted that socialism would be a disaster. I also should have asked you, about another guy from the UK. Did you ever read Oberon Herbert?
I am vaguely familiar with him. I know
Yeah.
The guy who, one of the founders of Springtime of Nations channel I mentioned before.
Yeah.
He's a big. I think he's read a lot of Herbert.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just trying to think of some good thinkers. One of the things I think is a weakness in objectivism and something that might be expounded upon. There's largely been this belief among objectivism that family is irrelevant. But it's like, well, how do you plan to, since we all die, how do we plan on spreading ideas and keeping these ideas and creating this culture of, if we don't have kids? And, I know there's so many people in objectivism, that are double income, no kids, or just not really having kids. And some of these women really want to be kind of the boss babe like Dagny Taggart, but then there are other, but then some of the women that are, went out and had kids, they're absolutely amazing women. They really have great attitudes. I mean, what do you think about this? It's just, I think it's probably the major weakness in Ayn Rand.
I mean, I think it depends on the context of your own life.
Yeah.
You should be selfish, of course. Like if having children, like you shouldn't do it altruistically as like some sacrifice for the future generations or anything. But I definitely do want to have children, because I think it's a very like amazing relationship to be able to bring someone up in the world and teach them all of this stuff, and they're so like curious about everything. Like it's an amazing thing to see.
Well, it's also, the attitude that you're going to have somebody who's there for you. You spend that time taking care of a baby, but then you're going to need somebody to take care of you. And it, may not just be your old age, but, let's say you have a car accident or something like that. If you've got a family, you don't really have anybody. It's really something that I I don't think a lot of people think about. And I think I'd also be curious, too. And they're finding. I don't know how much, I don't know how much we can trust this kind of science anymore. But I'm hearing studies, a woman who doesn't have kids is more likely to have breast cancer or things like that. It's just, yeah, it's not something it's definitely, I don't think we're going in a positive direction either. I'm also curious, I should ask you sooner, a guy who was, well, he's an American citizen and a citizen of the UK, and he lived in Luton for a while. What do you think about Andrew Tate?
I have not heard anything impressive coming from him ever. I think he's basically just a grifter.
That's that I can see that. I will give him credit for being great at telling stories, but comparing him to Aesop, I don't think is necessarily out of line. But I think he's also very much a natural, logical response, or maybe an illogical response to just the whole degeneracy of the West right now.
But then he's also perpetuating that degeneracy is the thing.
You could say that, yeah.
Like he got his start in running a cam website, like the guy's he's not a he just switches from grift to grift depending on, that's why I call him a grifter.
Yeah, I can't blame you for if it's easy money in the sex industry. I can't necessarily blame you though. But yeah. So I never asked you too. What do you think about John Stuart Mill, or William Godwin, or Mary Wollstonecraft?
I mean, I can't comment heavily on those until I've read them. I haven't really. I'm mostly focused my reading on more getting through all of Rand's fiction, getting through all of her nonfiction and all that sort of stuff.
You're really doing the deep dive right now. Is there anything else you've read that we haven't mentioned yet?
I suppose the most recent thing I've read is Wheel of Living. I just finished that off. I thought it was pretty good. It's got the weakest start of Rand's fiction as far as I've read it. But it definitely comes into its own.
Some people say it's her best novel, and I think it might be the most autobiographical. It's seeing it made into a movie was also pretty good. I mean, it's that's a funny story too, because the Italians bootlegged it and said, well, this is anti-communist, so they showed it as anti-communist, and it's like, well, the Germans were a little smarter, said, this is not just anti-communist.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's the interesting thing, because I'm going to watch the We the Living movie or movies. I think there might be 2 parts to it this Sunday, and apparently it's the best. It's the best of Rand's movie adaptations, and it's also the one that she didn't approve of. So that just tells you how far IP goes, eh?
I think it was probably the one that was also truest to the book. Movies, novels as they are, I think part of the issue is that they just don't translate well into 2 hours. You really need,
Yeah. The way I'm big into filmmaking and whatnot. The way I've thought of doing, I think if you are to do an Atlas Shrugged adaptation, it would have to be a TV show. And I've thought of, every single time I'm like, when I'm reading it, I'm like, yes, this is exactly how I would edit this scene. This is what it would look like. This is how it would be framed. Like you can, because she's a very precise and she's descriptive writer. You can almost just feel where the cuts should be and everything. At least if you're familiar with filmmaking to some degree. Like I think you could have a very good. I don't think you could have Atlas Shrugged in a movie. It's just way too much to go over in a single movie. It would have to be multiple parts to it, definitely, or in a TV series. I think TV series would be the best treatment for Atlas Shrugged. But for Fountainhead, you could probably get away with doing a movie of the Fountainhead. Definitely not the movie that they did, because the movie that they did was horrible. and completely contradicted the book in every way. But you could do a good movie adaptation of The Fountainhead. Pardon me, getting some
Well,
acid reflux going on here.
having read The Hunger Games and seeing those movies, I saw just how much you lose when you go to a movie. And in a lot of ways, I do think Katniss Everdeen is a great Randian hero, but you lose all of that. There was just so much taken out, and a lot of taken out was the moral dilemmas, and they just kept all the action. But another thing, I don't know how, so adopting movies, they're making all these changes that just don't seem to be. I didn't realize you were into filmmaking. That's certainly something you want to. Certainly something that's worth looking into as you make films. And
it's like, I'm not even like, I've never been a professional filmmaker or anything. Like, I've just learned this stuff from like, research online and whatnot. But like, even if anybody working on the Atlas Shrugged movies had read Save the Cat, then it would be instantly massively improved. Like, that not a single person who was working on that screenplay read Save the Cat or applied anything in there is just astounding to me. Yeah, Save the Cat. It's this famous book in screenwriting. Like, it's every single screenwriter on planet Earth. If you're even slightly interested in screenwriting, you've got to read Save the Cat. There are obviously other ones, some more academic, like Hero of a Thousand Faces and whatnot. But I mean, even if they just did a quick beat sheet on any of Atlas Shrugged, then it would be a much better movie.
I'll have to look that up. Save the Cat. Yeah, it's as speaking of filmmaking and stuff, what is some great? I got to ask. What do you think of Monty Python?
Oh, Monty Python is very good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'll watch. I'll rewatch like clips of that all the time on YouTube. It's great.
Yeah, and for a while, because of intellectual properties, all these clips disappeared, and then suddenly they all reappeared. It was so wild. So many Monty Python clips. I mean, just about of every sketch they ever did. You don't ever find the whole shows, but there's also been some really hilarious British comedy over the years.
Oh yeah, there are some great like duos. Like, there's Monty Python, of course. There's also like Fry and Laurie. That's great. Mitchell and Webb. That's another great one. Like, some great comedy throughout the years.
Yeah, Fry. Yeah, I've not heard of those ones, but I remember back when I was growing up, there was another guy who was on one TV station, Dave Allen. He was really funny. Yeah.
But you said there you haven't heard of Fry and Laurie, but I bet you'd know them if you saw them. Like, for instance, Hugh Laurie is the Laurie in that, and he did.
Oh yes,
he did Greg House on House MD, right?
Yes, House. Yes, I can imagine that it would be a.
And the other guy is Stephen Fry. I don't know if Stephen Fry's fame has reached the US, but he's very famous over here.
Yeah, well, there's some people that there are some people that are famous in the UK that just they're never famous in America, or don't nearly get the fame in America. Mm-hmm. The one not TV, but the one that I will never get is Cliff Richard. I don't know why hasn't Cliff? I mean, Cliff Richard is as big as Paul McCartney in the UK, but he's not big at all in America. And I think his music is really good, but that's, and sometimes I think it's just a matter of how much they push these people or how much they promote them. Yeah, it's also
it could also depend on the era, because Paul McCartney, the Beatles, they came up in the British invasion type era, where it's like all these British stars were famous in America,
Yeah, Cliff Richard was actually before that. I mean, he was, but he has this long career of making music. In fact, almost as long as the Beatles. But yeah, certainly, yeah. The Beatles definitely opened up the door. I mean, yeah, that was and I do like to say that you all do it better than we do. We invented rock and roll, but you've done it better with a lot of different reasons. But that was. I don't know what it is, and something else I've noticed too. in America, there's this attitude, like kids and teenagers will say, well, I can't listen to music that my mom and dad likes. So I will purposely listen to music that they hate. The UK doesn't seem to have that. Like, mom and dad can go to a concert with their teenagers and it's totally cool.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I might be biased by not caring what other people think, so I'll just listen to whatever I want.
Yeah.
But it's plausible that there's a cultural difference there.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. I don't think it's necessary. I never really understood that, but it's kind of silly that it's that way. You just, uh, although I've never gotten into it. I also know, some people are very dedicated fans of the Doctor.
I'm not familiar
Doctor
with
Who,
one.
that is.
Okay. Yes, Doctor Who's very big over here. Not so much these days, I don't think. I think it's kind of gone downhill.
Yeah, it's come and gone, but they have different people and different. It's certainly been reincarnated, but it's funny they don't make as many TV shows, or if you have a TV series, they don't produce it like they do in America. Like Monty Python would do maybe 10 shows a season, and here in America, it's not there was a time, when it was not unusual to do 30 shows a season, in a single, with season being 1 year. It's not sure why. Yeah.
It's also like British TV is generally a lot more like chill and muted, whereas American TV is very like in your face, like bah, 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 Like, I mean, even just the adverts. Like, I remember when I was over for YalCon, like the adverts I was seeing, they were like a parody of American TV. It was like severe weather now. You gotta get a generator now. Like it's all very very amped up.
Yeah, there's definitely differences. I've noticed sometimes, also the way, also if you ever, it's like sometimes you can go, this is one of the great things about YouTube. Sometimes I can go on the internet, and watch the Olympic coverage on it, like on the BBC or something like that too, and see how they call something versus how the Americans would call it, and there's this hilarious, and there's this one video I found where at the Winter Olympics where Lindsay Jacobellis gets the big lead in the snowboard, and then she starts to show off and falls and ends up getting the silver medal instead of the gold after having a huge lead. And this English guy named Ed Lee is announcing it, and he just it's such a great call. And I thought to myself, I don't think an American guy would ever go like this. But it just depends. He was into the race from the beginning. You can tell this guy really likes snowboarding, But so yeah. Well, this has been a good show. I think we'll probably wrap it up right now. You have anything else to say before we go?
Yeah, I think it was a great show. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah,
Yeah, I appreciate
good
it.
having you on too. Yeah, I need to check out some more of your stuff too. I'd heard good things about you, but I did see your show with Leibowitz, and Leibowitz is a great guy. I had him on once, yeah. Yeah. Well, okay, so you just your YouTube channel. Anywhere else we find you on the net, or?
Yeah, there's my YouTube channel. My website is liquidzulu.github.io, and if you go to liquidzulu.github.io/brain, all lowercase, then that is my wiki site where I'm currently trying to build up this philosophical project of mine. I think a wiki format is more accessible than even like the Ayn Rand lexicon, because you can link between different pages, have all these webs going on. It's great. You guys should definitely check it out.
Yeah, and that's on GitHub. Okay, that's because GitHub is usually like programs and stuff like that. But
yeah, it's that if you can have a static site hosted on GitHub for free. So I compile the site on GitHub servers, and then GitHub will send it out to people.
That's cool then, yeah. And so yeah, and please like my video. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Go buy my novel Escaping the Village. I've also got a Substack, and I'm now also on Buy Me a Coffee, so you can buy me a coffee, so to speak. And thank you, Liquid Zulu, where we are out.